Sorry about that abrupt ending to the last video. Apparently I had to free up storage on my phone, so I'm hoping we're good to go. But if this ends abruptly, it may end up being part 2 of 3, 4, who knows. So yes, what I want to talk to you about is by no means new concepts, but my understanding of them and how it's all interrelated is new. And as I think I touched on, the perspective I'm coming from may be one that's considered technical. My terminology is not, my understanding is not, but this is just how I'm linking all the dots together and sharing where I'm at with you. So please take it or leave it. And yeah, so brainwaves have got me interested lately, and the fact that brainwaves, like all waves, are measured generally in amplitude and cycles per second, which the cycles per second relates to the speed of the firing in the brain, the electrical impulses, how quickly they occur in a second. The amplitude and the analogy I've been given to understand things, because I'm not technical with all of this, I've had no interest in this up until now, like a lot of things recently. Amplitude, if you think of an echo, so a high amplitude would be when you're standing on top of a cliff and you make a noise and it travels far from your mouth and reaches a far distance, and it sort of reverberates back. And then if you imagine doing it somewhere where there would be no echo and just making the noise repeatedly, nothing coming back, that would be a low amplitude. So the impulses are coming quick, but they're not really going anywhere. Anyway, that's just how I understand it. And there's been 4 main brainwave states that are linked to our consciousness and the different aspects of it that we tap into on basically a daily basis. So I'm going to start at the bottom for a reason and work my way up. And I'm not going to go into them in great detail. Most of you, I'm sure, are already familiar. Delta waves being the lowest. Generally, the brain fires between half a second to 4 cycles per second, but it's got a very high amplitude. So the firing of these impulses, while not very frequently compared to the others, they travel the furthest in their vibration. This is the state of being, we hit in deep sleep, where basically everything shuts down. We're largely very unconscious and our body goes into a state of repair and healing, all of those sort of things. It's also where miracle healing can be known to occur in those brainwave states, and what you would consider deep spiritual connections, like I guess samadhi, some call it, or that at one-ment. So that's, some people, if your sleep's being interrupted, it's very hard to get into those brainwave states, which are the most healing and the most needed for our bodies, and well, for all layers really. Then we move up to the theta waves, and they generally cycle between, I think it's 4 and 8 cycles per second, and have a lower amplitude. This state we can most closely relate to when we're just falling asleep and when we're just waking up. And in those moments we can be aware of information, but as we start moving our body, opening our eyes, and coming back into our senses, 5 physical senses, retaining that information becomes much harder. And often that's why it's advised to keep a journal next to your bed, and even before opening your eyes, try to ground the knowledge from your unconscious and superconscious into your consciousness, so at least enough to write down notes that will help you remember what happened, although our dreams are becoming much easier to remember these days. So yeah, that's a state that people get into with deep meditation. It's that state where you disengage from the body, and um, it, it's a weird way to describe it. You're just consciousness, because you have in those moments no connection to your body, and then if you move it in any way, that tends to bring you back out of it, which leads us to the alpha brainwaves, where they are between, I think it's around 8 to 12 cycles per second, and again a lower amplitude even further. This is where we're relaxed, and those moments where you're just sort of daydreaming or reflecting, where you're creative, those creative juices are flowing, and it's also where you can that tends to be the general state when we step back from our everyday lives, and the focus becomes more inward rather than what's going on outwards. Then we get to the beta brainwaves, and these are the ones that largely control our everyday waking life, because they're the ones, and I think they're from about 13 up to about 38-40 cycles per second. There's varying theories on what the exact figures are, so I'm just going in what feels right to me. So please don't hold me to it. So this is when we're very outwardly focused on navigating the world around us. So from what I understand, the beta brainwaves direct how we process this overwhelming flood of information that comes to us from all 5 senses, and which we consciously focus on, which go into our unconscious, and which go into our superconscious. And so the conscious mind tends to receive the information that's essential for our survival for the most part. It's what is the information that's familiar to us, what we're expecting to receive to some degree, and what we want to receive information and feedback on. So that all gets fed into the conscious part of the mind. The unconscious gets all the information related to our body, our emotions, our ego, personality self, and to that of those around us, information relating to those around us that are part of our everyday experience. So often when you have those dreams where you it's almost like a dress rehearsal, like if you've got an interview the next day, things like that, that's where you're tapping into a lot of that information that's been fed into your unconscious. And often we feel tired when we wake up, because it's literally like we've been working during our sleep. There are other reasons for feeling tired, even though you've had a lot of sleep. I've often been shown that's because you've been busy doing service work during the night. And I'm like, oh, okay, awesome. I'm very tired today though. And then our superconscious gets fed all the information that comes relating to our collective consciousness, our higher self, our reason for incarnating, access to information from other lives, all of those sort of things. And so the beta does multiple functions, but primarily it's that state of thinking, of navigating the world, being very outwardly focused. But it's also, I guess you could say, there's hyper beta as well, where we're either really excited or we're really anxious, and stressed and worried. And generally it's usually the latter for a lot of people still out there. But anyway, so those 4 brain waves, and I'm not sure whether it's the 4th or the 5th one that I'm going to start talking about included in this, but they are largely responsible for those different states of consciousness that we naturally tend to find ourselves in, and also for the frequency bandwidth that we can perceive in light and sound. So we know that generally the human 5 senses can perceive color from red to violet, and then we've got ultraviolet and other colors that are beyond our perception but are measurable, and then we have those that have not even been measured yet, and they come into this too. Sorry, I'm just going to lean forward and take a drink of water because I'm feeling like I'm clicking a lot. Just one sec. Sorry about that. So what's happening at the moment with all of these activations and things happening in the brain, when we have also been, and I know for at least the last few years, I'm sure probably much earlier than that, but I've been aware of it in, I think it's about the last 4 years, these gamma frequencies, which fall in the 3840 mark up to 100 cycles per second. So these are very fast, rapid firing of the brain. And again, sorry that I'm not being technical here. And this is basically a lot of what's happening at the moment is our brain is opening up. And so with that, and I wrote notes because I wanted to make sure I touch on everything in this in case I get cut off. So our brain is expanding in the way, in the range of frequencies that it can now receive, I suppose. The gamma frequencies that I talk about is what is associated with that 5D energy, because it's a unification. It's known as a unification frequency, and what it does is basically not quite fully activates whole brain thinking, but it takes the information that's stored in all these different compartments, largely the two thalamus complexes in either hemispheres of the brain, and rather than accessing them independently, it gets it all together and kind of merges it or synthesizes it into like this hologram where all the information can be perceived and the bigger picture can be seen. And I suppose this is like the level of the higher mind that I'm talking about. And it allows, instead of seeing just the aspect that's right in front of us, like seeing one curve of the donut, you can step back and see the whole donut and the whole and the whole picture. And I don't know why I'm using donuts as a reference, it just came into my mind then. And so what's happening is there are two new brainwaves that are really starting to make a dominant appearance, and I believe this is what I meant when I referred to this higher light coding coming in beyond even the 5D threshold. So with the Schumann, we know it only goes up to 40 hertz, which is the edge, I'm guessing, of the beta brainwave and the threshold of the gamma. And as we know, the gamma's got like quite a long bandwidth. So the upper ranges are classed as hypergamma, I believe, which is why I guess the 5D realm itself does have that multiple layers of experience to it as well. But the point of getting there is because from there it's a perspective of unity, not this separation. So while there's many levels above that are there, the main goal is to get from this place of separation back into one of unity, and then from there even higher levels, unfold before us. So these two new brainwaves coming in, you've probably heard of them, are the Lambda and the Epsilon waves. The Lambda are extremely fast beyond the gamma waves, and they cycle between 100 to 200 cycles per second. Can you imagine how fast that is? Firing in your brain. I can't even move my fingers that fast to kind of represent it. So this is going really, really fast. And this is the state of mind that those Tibetan monks, I believe, that can go out in the middle of winter in the snow with barely anything on and regulate their body temperature with their consciousness and actually melt snow around them. And then we have the the Epsilon waves, which are even slower than the delta waves. And I believe they're supposed to cycle between 0, maybe not quite 0, I don't know, because I think then you'd be dead, but maybe that's what this is getting at, between, so say 0 or just above 0 to half a cycle per second. So slow. And that's where people have been thought dead, because they're not breathing, they have no pulse, they have no heartbeat, nothing, yet they either revive themselves or they are brought out of it, and yeah, they're not dead at all. And that's that kind of I guess you'd kind of like suspended, I suppose. So one of those brainwaves, the lambda, is extremely fast, and the other one, the epsilon, is extremely slow. But what they've identified is these two waves kind of ride on each other or piggyback on top of each other. So one always follows the other. And that's what our higher senses do. They piggyback on top of our 5 senses. And now that these higher frequencies, and what I guess you'd say lower, but it's still higher, if you know what I mean, are coming in, they both have a similar effect. The gamma energies are a harmonizer, and these ones are a unifier. So this is where that true sense of at one-ment is experienced, and obviously not for long states at the moment for people that are getting there, because I think you just have to be sitting there in complete meditation, not moving, and literally suspended to maintain that state. But they are available for us to tap into now, and I'll get to the message that came up around that at the end. But if you haven't seen the video where I talk about the triangle in the brain, I think I named it personal share and update on monadic integration. That explains the triangle in detail. I'm not going to get into it now. But what I'm saying is, as the third eye begins to activate, then the range of what we can see and hear expands beyond what it has been. When the triangle is fully activated, this sets off a process where the pineal gland is triggered and sends messages to the body that it's to start consciously receiving these higher frequencies and what I would say multi-dimensional stimuli. So it can become very disarming when you do, and I'm sure many of you have already experienced this, when the stimuli starts coming not just from the 5 senses and almost bombarding, and you think, oh, what's happening here? And you have to sort of gather yourself for a minute, because it's just coming from everywhere, and not everyone around you is experiencing what you are, and it's really unsettling. But that's what's been happening and continuing to happen. So the pineal gland sets the message up that, okay, we need to start receiving consciously these multidimensional energies, frequencies, that you would call it. And then the pineal gland responds by allowing more and more of this light to be drawn in. And how do I put this down? I want to make sure I get this right from this aspect. So the chloride plexus that I mentioned in the video, which I believe forms the roof and sits above the third ventricle, gets the message that it needs to start creating cerebral spinal fluid that matches this new frequency, I think. That resonates to this higher frequency that's coming in. And so then the cerebral spinal fluid gets sent through the brain, through the spinal cord, and it basically starts coating the nervous system with this higher frequency and running this frequency through the nervous system, which is why a lot of us have been struggling with feeling like our nervous systems are overloaded or fragile, feeling very electrified at times, and then feeling the effects of that very strongly afterwards when that energy is left. So it really is a real thing that this is kind of running through our nervous system. But then it